If you enjoy this video, please consider giving a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And if you have any ideas for future videos, share them in the comments section below. So just take a moment to allow your eyes to close and allow yourself to begin to relax. And as you begin to comfortably drift asleep, I'm just going to tell this bedtime story in the background. And this is a bedtime story about a man who lives on a space station. One day he's running on this space station, and every day to keep fit, he runs around the inside of the space station. And this space station is like a giant loop, and that loop slowly turns, and that slow turning creates gravity on the inside of the loop. And so this man is running around this inside of this loop, and as he looks overhead, he can see the center of the space station, and there's almost like a skylight in the roof of this space station, looking down on that center, looking over towards the far side of the loop, just about catching a glimpse of the stars outside in space. And he runs around in this space station, and after a number of laps, he comes to a halt, then goes and sits in a park on a bench. And this space station is full of natural-looking parks and wildlife to try to give some level of feeling like it could be on Earth. But it's all in a narrow band. And he rests in that park for a while. He watches some owners out with their dogs chasing sticks. And then goes and changes to head into work. He catches a lift that heads to the center of this space station. The center of this space station has 0 Gs. He floats down the center to the main command room, checks into work, takes up his station, and can see out the front of this space station the vastness of space that they're travelling through. And space is so vast that they almost feel like they're not moving. The view changes so incredibly slowly. And yet, they're doing tens of thousands of miles an hour. And this space station has been travelling through space for decades. And it's a generational space station. So there's enough people on this space station to sustain a population over many generations. And as they travel along, So the man notices on his sensors something unusual. It seems like there's another object out there in space. And there's been nothing close enough for decades to show up on the sensors. Most objects are at least light years away. And they're not changing course, but they can see that this object seems to be heading in their direction. And so they work out the trajectory. They find out that they're going to come very close to each other. And so as that object comes closer and closer, it seems to be accelerating. And they try to get a look on long-range scanners. They direct their onboard telescopes towards that object and see that it is an artificial object, just like theirs. And one trick that this spaceship has is that as it spins, it can unfurl a material that's highly reflective to fill the space from the ring that everyone lives in to the central column. And it can turn the spaceship into a giant telescope, creating a receiver of that light near the head of the ship, with the mirror directing that light to that point at the front. And although that mirror is spinning because the spaceship is spinning, it's so perfect and smooth that the reflected light isn't impacted by the spinning of the mirror. And so they continue to watch this artificial craft as it approaches and seems to be accelerating. They deploy this mirror, turning the entire ship into a giant telescope, with the idea that after this artificial craft has passed by, they can keep an eye on it and get an even closer look at it by using the entire ship as a telescope. And it can only look in one direction. But for a period of time, that ship will be in front of them and in that direction. And they can record all the data as the ship passes across in front of them. And at such a high rate, they can slow it right down. So even an incredibly short, almost blink of the eye, speed of that ship being in line with the mirror, they can record that with so much data that they can slow it right down, so that blink of an eye passage of time, they can view it over many minutes to analyze the footage. And they watch as that ship continues to accelerate, and then it does something strange. It seems to accelerate even faster as it darts in front of them. And then just as it's passing in front of them, it accelerates so fast that in a flash, it's vanished. Almost like driving on a motorway and having a car going fast enough to catch up, to begin to overtake. But unknown to you at the time, the car has the acceleration that once it's in front, it can then accelerate even faster and be out of sight rapidly. And it takes a few days for the data gathered by the telescope to process. And after that data has processed, the man sits in a room with other senior staff, and on a big screen they play for the first time the footage from the telescope of that craft. And they play it incredibly slowly. And as it plays, they can see initially there's nothing out of the ordinary. They can see in high detail what the craft looks like from the outside. They can even notice through the windows in the craft the beings that are on that craft and recognize that they aren't human. But then at that point, where they just saw a flash of light and the craft vanished, they see the most unusual thing. That at just that point, with the video feed slowed down to as slow as it'll go, at the point they saw it accelerate even faster, it seemed to make a flash. And then the next frames show it looking like it's going backwards, as if it's somehow travelling backwards in time. And yet, their craft, even though it looks like it's reversing back towards them as they approach it, never struck them. And as it appears like it's moving backwards, it becomes fainter, and they can see through it, as if it's quickly passing from being in front of them as a solid object to not being in front of them at all. And they knew that they would be scouring over this data for years to come to try and figure out what they can learn about those beings, to try and work on enhancing the footage, to see even more detail about the craft, about the beings on the craft, and to analyse that moment when it seemed to accelerate so fast. In a flash of light it started going backwards, and by the way it was fading as it was heading backwards, that it seemed like it was going backwards in time rather than backwards in space. And after his shift, the man wandered off and was pondering these thoughts, was wondering about that experience, who those aliens were. It was the first time they'd ever encountered other life since setting off from Earth. It was concrete evidence that we are not alone. The man was tasked with writing the speech that would announce this to all those on board. And before announcing it, they would do a full investigation and analysis to try to work out exactly what happened, and as much detail as they can that they can then pass on to those on their space station. And this was an exciting moment. This idea they'd not only discovered life beyond Earth for the first time ever, but have been able to confirm that that life is more advanced than they are, and that if there is life out there which is more advanced than they are, and that that has been confirmed, then life must be everywhere. Because if the pinnacle of life is out there, life that has reached a point where it can travel between the stars, then more primitive life that's still confined to planets, that perhaps hasn't found ways or evolved to a point of intellect where it can go beyond being confined to a planet, must also be out there. And even more primitive life, like just plants, or even just bacteria, must exist everywhere. That the chances of running into other intelligent and spacefaring beings was thought to be so incredibly slim and unlikely, even in a space like the Milky Way, that to do that already within just decades of setting off from Earth means that advanced life must be more spread out through the Milky Way than first thought. And this technology they had seemed like faster than light travel. By the way that it seemed to disappear on camera. And there was no way with the whole ship as a telescope that they could track it or learn anything more. But the man knew that just the little bit they do have will lead to so many papers, articles, theories, that it will be pored over for decades to come. And when travelling through space as a small community, it's not like there's lots of other things to do. They have a lot of time to think about problems from an intellectual perspective, to obsess about the smallest discovery, let alone something as big as this. One day the man was walking through a park and he could hear people mowing the lawn of the park, smell that cut grass smell. And he wondered what it used to be like for those who lived on Earth for that first generation who boarded this craft. Whether the experience of cut grass and mowing was different for them because they knew of that action on Earth, not just here on a space station. Was the experience different for them to him? Because he really liked that smell of the cut grass. Found something about it so relaxing and calming. He wondered whether the light on the space station is different to light on Earth. That the lights that run like two strips around the inside of the ring, shining down onto the land, that roughly every 12 hours begin the process of slowly dimming, like nighttime setting in, and small lights dotted through this ring of the space station light up. Then 12 hours or so later, the ring of lights slowly begins to brighten. He was wondering to himself, how does the lighting differ on Earth compared to here? Is it a good substitute? He'd only ever seen videos of sunrises and sunsets and all those fancy colours that you get with a sunrise and a sunset. His experience was that the sky darkens and the sky lightens, but the sky doesn't have a colour. It isn't blue like he's seen in photos and videos of Earth. And it doesn't turn shades of oranges and reds. And he thinks the photos and videos look impressive, but he's curious what the experience of seeing that was like. And he sits down and he reads an old book from centuries earlier. And in this old book, he reads about the experience of the author watching a sunset. He reads about the experience of them camping overnight on the edge of a small cliff overlooking an ocean after the sun has set, the stars in the sky, the moon in the sky, the sound of the ocean waves gently rolling and lapping onto the shore, the feeling of the cool breeze, then falling asleep, and then the next day awakening to a sunrise, and when the sun reaches a certain point in the sky, feeling that warmth of the sun on your cheeks, almost feeling a pressure from the sun across your body, seeing the way the sun glistens along the surface of the ocean. And the man thinks to himself that that's all stuff he's never experienced. He's never experienced a pressure from the lights. He's never experienced the sound of an ocean. the feeling of warmth, of light on his cheeks. He'd only ever experienced this artificial representation of an earthly environment. And he thinks to himself that on one level, he's never had those experiences, so he doesn't know what he's missing. And it isn't like there's anything inherently bad with the experience he has. He enjoys the smell of the grass. He likes the green meadows, parks, trees. He likes seeing the different animals. But he is curious about those subtle experiences that you can't get when living your entire life on a space station. And after giving much thought to this, he begins to walk to his home. And all homes of all those who live here are designed like flats, like blocks of flats lining the park on either side. And also lining the parks and the meadows in certain locations are what look like rows of shops to try and give a traditional feel, where you can go into a location to purchase some food, or you can go and find some clothes, but everything is grown or made here. Normally in a laboratory, and some things are grown in the spinning circle, in the area where everyone lives, because that area has gravity. Other things, it's been discovered, grow much better in 0G, and so are grown in laboratories within the main trunk of the space station. Whenever you want to create a perfect sphere, for example, say from liquid, that can be created easier in 0G than under the force of gravity. Some things that are heavy work are easier to do in 0G, where it takes minimal effort to move things around and interact with things. But other things require gravity for their production. And out the back side of the various businesses, out the back side of the various flats, are windows that look out on space. The thinking being that if you have a view, even if it's essentially just of the night sky all the time, it reduces that feeling of being trapped and confined. It gives you something to look at. And people always found gazing up at the night sky comforting, relaxing. And so it was felt a good way of helping to facilitate that comfort and deep relaxation. And so the man headed to his flat. He had himself some food. He settled down for the night, drifted and floated so peacefully and so comfortably asleep, sleeping soundly all night long, pondering various questions of what it's like, comparing being on the space station with Earth, and what more will be learned about those aliens that were seen so close to the ship, and whether their choice to get so close to the ship in the vastness of space before accelerating off in a location that makes it obvious and easy for the ship to have seen, whether all that was done on purpose as a message, whether that message can be translated and understood in some way, whether anything else can be learned, and whether there's going to be future encounters because of their technology. And he drifts and floats so peacefully, so comfortably, so relaxed, asleep all night long.